Abstract. The Nature of International Law as It Really Is. By Bjorkman. The nature of international law as it really is a journey for those who wish to understand how international law works, how their country measures up in the world of international relations, and how that can be measured. International law resides with 5 countries: USA, Russia, China, France, and the UK. This paper will take you through world history from 5000 BC to till the established UNSC today. The journey begins with the city-states, nation-states, empires, imperialism and colonialism, League of Nations to finally the UN United Nations Security Council. You will be left with a sense of where you come from, an origin of your nation's status, and how to properly gauge the success rate of your nation in international law. The UN Charter of 1945 after World War II was the first time in world history sex, race, religion, labor, standard of living and human rights wherever today, and across all continents presented to all nations. The rules are clear and binding laws are absolute when bound by all 5 of the UNSC permanent members. There are several ways to create international law, and this paper will in plain speak provide all readers a simple path to navigating this system as it really is. Who should read The Nature of International Law as It Really Is? Law students, professors, academics, economists, political scientists, historians, policy makers, politicians, UN General Assembly, the United Nations Security Council, and especially all citizens concerned about the status of their country, region or union. The nature of international law as it really is. Introduction. International law today is cemented in the 5 allied countries from World War II. Those countries are the United States of America, Russia, China, United Kingdom, and France. They alone and unanimously in consensus dismantle world law or bind world law. 1. The nature of international law as it really is will take you on a journey from pre-World War II League of Nations to till today, outlining truth and reconciliation with how the world really operates legally. In this paper you will be able to assess your own country's position past and present today globally, against what is legality and what is not on the international world stage. A detailed and comparative look at the nature of why some countries have to be accountable while others are not will be examined. A first in-depth look at the ultimate authority, the United Nations permanent security members who are bound in an eternal union until a declaration of World War III is realized. 2. Before we can navigate the nature of international law as it really is, one must first start with the city-states, national states, the treaties, League of Nations until finally arriving at the United Nations. Origins of international law. City-states. What was? City-states historically are the roots of international law. This section will look at antiquity from 5000 BC to 476 AD. We will journey through definition of the city-state and the role of city-states in developing international law. The role of empires born out of city-states throughout the period and how international law was developed over the time period will be brought forward. 3. Multiple. International law is as old as the act of war in this world. It is the process of establishing borders, boundaries, rules of trade, conduct, war and mutual understandings between those who differ in their cultural, religious, domestic laws and occupied resources of a given region. In antiquity this is the city, and that means its access to water, trade and minimum surrounding agricultural boundaries to feed itself and repel invaders. 4. City-states were breeding grounds for military and might. The rise of empires are tied to the strength and scale of city-states. International law during this period was based on the most powerful over the least powerful. Historical records during city-state antiquity can be found in Sumerian cities 5000 BC to 2004 BC, religion and class. 2100 BC stone tablet treaties between Lagash and Umma, QQ. The Greeks 1796 BC to 330 AD great city-states. The city-state continues forward as empires form and national states become the next evolution in international law. Before concluding the city-state origins, it is important to understand the overlap and continued viability of the city-state into the empire-nation eras. Today only 3 city-states remain registered: Monaco, Singapore and Vatican City. At the height of the city-state era there were more than 1,000. During antiquity, international law represented agreements on rules of war, borders, trade, cultural and religious agreements. 5. Multiple. Origins of international law. Nation-states. What was? In this section we hit a mighty academic divide on the nation-state. Internationally there exists massive splits on understanding, historical definitions, philosophy, cultural, religious, economic, geographic and legal academic publications on the true origins of the nation-state. In this portion we will concede that the true nation-state must be measured by all. The Peace of Westphalia 1648, and except China, France, Portugal, Dutch Republic, Italy, East African nations, Germany and the Middle East in their interpretations going through empires, imperialism and colonialism. The nation-state comprises of land territory where political, cultural, ethnic, language and religion may unite the people inside a region, and further have the military power to maintain or expand it. The reality for most of the world pre-1648 was military occupation and political will overwhelming citizens of the land area. Better known as the Age of Empires. 6. Multiple. Nation-states. What was international law? Empires. Nation-states and the period of empires is historically European vs Asian accounts. This section will take into account a broader understanding. The first clear and true form of the nation-state is found in Iraq, the Persian Empire. Here we see clear evidence of international law and trade tariffs, tribute, the royal road, standard national language, postal service, and the monetary system. Straps and the Cyrus cylinder prove regional monarchs pledging to an emperor, and further codified human rights across many regions. 522 BC to 486 BC. 7. The second clear and true form of the nation-state is found in Rome. While first founded in 27 BC, and declining to Eastern Rome by 1400 AD, we see international law administered. Rules to declare war, rules of spoils, rules of envoys, rules of negotiators, rules of prisoners of war, commerce and treaties. Rome is the source of international law distinguished by law common to all. 8. The third and final look in this section is at the nation-state of the Swahili Coast Zanzibar Island State. A city-state transcending the definition with currency and customary Asian maritime law with China and India. 600 AD to 1497 AD. 9. Nation-states. What was international law? Imperialism. Imperialism is defined as the policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force. To apply the definition in context with nation-state and international law we must fuse the two, and that means beginning in 1500 AD. An important first distinction is that imperialism does not mean moving a significant portion of a foreign empire's population to displace an indigenous population. 10. Multiple. Under this strict set of rules we can look at China as a 4,000-year practitioner of imperialism, and then becoming a victim of imperialism by 1521 AD. This is the convergence of Chinese-Portuguese maritime international law, rules of war, annexation, child sex trafficking, slavery and human rights concluded in 1595 AD. 11. Multiple. Portugal's imperialism began earlier with Africa and India as well. However, the practice of annexation of islands, erecting military installations and embassies clearly establishes international law of nation-states and defines imperialism with only China. 12. Multiple. Further than this period, arguments can be made for limited colonial aspirations vs domestic migration. Imperialism defined international law of the Russian nation-state as seen with the Livonian War, Treaty of Plusa, Treaty of Tiasina, War of Ingria, Treaty of Stolbovo. Here we see multinationals develop rules of war, annexation, and regional boundaries over cities and land. 13. Multiple. None of the conflicts and annexations involved changing local customs, religion, or language transitions. There were no major population replacements completed by any of the multiple nations. Nation-states. What was international law colonialism? Modern colonialism, as it applies to international law development, must be defined as an empire nation-state replacing an indigenous population in a foreign region, or previously settled lands overseas. It is important in this section to distinguish the right to displace a lower inferior culture with a superior culture and impose religion, customs, language, and laws. Key nation-state empires of this period of colonialism include Portugal, Spain, France, Denmark, Great Britain, and Germany. The time period we will be focusing on is 15th century onward through to 1914. Colonial Portugal starts with Africa, completed in 1498. African countries include present-day West African, Guinea-Bissau, and the two southern countries Angola and Mozambique. After invasion upon invasion, the regions were colonized and the Portuguese language was cemented officially. Resisting indigenous Africans were captured and sent off to the New World as slaves. An important point to make is that this is the start of the slave trade in international law colonialism. Within only decades and a century, Portugal goes on to colonize what is modern Brazil, Venezuela, and Uruguay. Important to note, modern Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, Canada were also targeted for colonization, however, possibly due to successfully introducing a robust slave trade in South America with Africans, the defeated indigenous people of South America. Portugal abandoned many cities it founded, including St. John's and St. Peter's. Important legality is found with the doctrine of discovery, the international law of colonization. It was found through Christianity, the Pope, Portugal, Spain, and England over the rest of the unchristian world. All indigenous civilizations were to be converted to Christian. This led to much more abuses, including land acquisition, slavery, imposed supremacy, new national languages, and absolute adoption of the foreign empire. Spanish colonialism of northern Africa overlaps the same period as Portugal. Spain, under Catholic doctrine of kings, papal grant, powers of patronage, amazed over 35 colonies in a 250-year period. This included Africa, Equatorial Guinea, Sahara, and Morocco. In North America, the United States, Florida, Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, California, and Puerto Rico. Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean islands of Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica, Trinidad, Cubagua, and Margarita. South American colonies included all of the present countries except Brazil. The Spanish colonialism period wiped out the Inca and Aztec civilizations through disease and war. Those indigenous who would not convert were added to the slave trade economy. Papal doctrine was used as international law during this period of colonialism. The French colonialism at two historical periods saw France in second place for worldwide expansion. France also adopted the Catholic doctrine on conversion of indigenous populations. They also participated in the slave trade for the sugarcane industry. Much of North American expansion was mercantile and conversion that was not the international law employed by the other European colonials. France colonized Acadia, Newfoundland, Hudson Bay, St. Lawrence, Great Lakes, Lake Winnipeg, and Quebec in Canada. In modern USA, they colonized with Fort St. Louis, Texas, St. Croix, USA Virgin Islands, Fort Caroline, French Florida, Louisiana, New France, as well as Upper Lower Louisiana. South America, Brazil, islands of the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. West Africa would include 7 colonies. Those would be marred in slavery and papal doctrine. Rights of the indigenous populations were removed. France colonized the South Asian areas of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. The civilizing missions. Denmark colonialism of the time periods were based on the slave trade mercantilism. Greenland and Iceland being the only exceptions, the Danish West Indies were sugar plantations run by slave labor. The Dutch were all over the world on many islands and for continents around the world. Estonia marks the oldest and first example of clear colonialism. The British Empire dominated a 150-year colonial history that will lead us into the League of Nations. Great Britain at its height in 1938 controlled directly 20% of the world's population and 24% of its land mass. It was the largest empire on Earth at the time. The British Empire spanned 7 continents, and war followed in its wake. Brute force domination by superiority of navy, trade, annexation, large settler relocations and slavery. Great Britain abolished slavery, however imposed class structure and divinity of crown everywhere they colonized. Entirely Canada, much of USA, New Zealand, India, China, most of Africa, the Caribbean, Australia and many, many islands around the world. Britain brutalized Americans, Indians, Asians and Africans who resisted their international laws of trade, first value and supply chains, taxation, British Crown authority first, second and third class. Most notable is the Hindu segregation in India. Britain fought the other colonial powers and maintained naval superiority for more than 150 years. Germany is an important closure for colonialism, and WWI changes international law. Genocide came clearly into focus in Africa at this time. While a short period of German colonialism happened, they were the third largest of the time. Africa sees Germany colonize 22 of their countries today, and by 1914, they were all seized by the allies of WWI. Africa sees Germany colonize 22 of their countries today, and by 1914, they were all seized by the allies of WWI. Nation-states, what was international law? League of Nations. Colonialism is marked by a change in international law worldwide by the dominance of Europe over the rest of the world. A divine justification of church and nation-states saw empires annex, slaughter, slave, indoctrinate, claim land, language and cultural superiority through oppression, settlement or war. International law was based on how strong you were, which determined the size of your claims, and your nation-state's authority to administer international law as seen fit, and ordained by the church to your monarch. The colonial empires fought each other too. There are many colonial treaties and international laws during this period. The law of inequality and subjugation. The absolute removal of sovereignty is the highlight of colonialism. 14. Multiple. It is important to note that many genocides committed during colonialism were okay in international law as long as it was being done by Europeans belonging to the church doctrine and against non-Christians. WWI was the Europeans fighting Europeans for the title of who was the mightiest colonizer. A special note here is the Russian and USA's ally status and involvement during the war. Russia defended Orthodox Serbia and had plans for Constantinople out to the Mediterranean Sea. USA entered the war much later in 1917, only because Germany attacked and sank USA merchant ships in the British Isles. WWI was a battle of supremacy. Upon completion the Treaty of Versailles and the Paris Peace Accord, we see the birth of the League of Nations. Germany was punitively punished as a European nation-state. Reparations are introduced nearly 100 years after Haiti had to repatriate France. This was the first time international law was applied unequally to a European nation-state. The League of Nations Charter, a global constitution, is ratified and begins a global blanket based in Europe to be adopted worldwide. Before continuing forward, an important fact must be understood: neither Russia or USA, by choice, were involved in the design of the League or crafting the charter/constitution. In fact, only empires of imperialism and colonialism were the official drafters, excluding the central powers of WWI. Japan was the first nation to present racial equality to be in line with religious equality. France requested an international army be raised, and USA removed itself from all talks. An important note: USA votes down joining the League of Nations and votes unanimously for America First. 15. Multiple. Nation-states. What was international law? The Covenant of the League of Nations. International law following the ratified global document sees Articles I to XXVI outline a global system of trade and governance over war, disputes, territory, colonies, and disarmament. Child labor, sex trafficking, slavery, race, and outside religious freedoms are left out, as well as the non-colonials and central powers from WWI. The League cements the law of mandate over less civilized peoples and grants absolute immunity and superiority of council members. One new distinction of the time is equality for men or women to run for positions in the League. A new international law for gender equality. 16. Nation states. What was international law? Permanent Council of the League of Nations. The Permanent Council of the League of Nations was Britain, France, Italy, and Japan. 4 to 9 others would be elected by the General Assembly, and they each would hold a veto on crafting international law. In the beginning things worked well for the League, and a brief period of successful legal policies followed and peaceful settlements. In time, members, specifically the Permanent Council members and alienated central powers, would break with the League and go to war. Italy and Japan as well as Germany broke with the mandates of the League of Nations, and would later encompass the Axis powers of World War II. The League of Nations was the first international multistage governance in world history. Here we find the first International Court of Justice, 63 member states in the world, and mechanisms of territorial respect, law of the seas, and human rights reform. Over 100 multinational decisions, over 17 years provided the first serious glimpse of multiple nation states crafting international law nearly worldwide binding. 17. Multiple. The United Nations Security Council. What international law is? World War II is the result of the inefficient and ineffective League of Nations. Important issues of decolonization, human rights, race, class, and inequality/isolation come to a head as Europe and the entire world fall into chaos. From the ashes of atomic bombs, the world transforms into a new period of international law never seen before in world history. The absolute law of sovereignty is introduced. 5 allied powers bind the world into a new enlightened state. 18. Multiple. The UN Charter 1945. What international law is? The 5 allies of World War II established a universal system of membership presenting absolute inclusion of all races, sexes, and religions. All allied nations are accepted and former Axis nations are open to apply after the formation of the Charter, and then agree to friendly relations. China as the Taiwan Republic, Communist Beijing as of 1971, Soviet Union, Russia today, United States of America, Britain, United Kingdom today, and France are cemented as the Permanent Security Council of the United Nations. The world voted and all new members since agree and sign onto the binding document. Important first in cementing of a global union and dues system is established. Labor is also placed inside the binding document. Important deviations to note about international law by the United Nations Security Council permanent members. The law of sovereignty. The absolute law of self-determination. The Permanent Security Council veto. Sex, race, and religious inclusion. The International Court of Justice. The absolute binding authority of the 5 territories, colonies, protectorates, and regions. Human rights and absolute equality of all UN states. 19. United Nations Security Council, absolute binding law if abstention, and non-binding or no to international law. The nature of international law as it really is. To navigate international law as it really is cemented in 4 simple rules since 1945 till today. Absolute binding law. The Security Council permanents have voted 5 out of 5 on a General Assembly convention passed by February 3rd of the member states. Binding law if abstention. Of the 5 Security Council permanent members have at least one of them voting yes, and the other 4 have abstained from a General Assembly convention passed by February 3rd of the member states. Non-binding or no to international law happens if just one no vote comes from any of the 5 permanent Security Council members. International peace and security has been breached by any nation in the world, or the UN Charter has been breached. The five have absolute authority over expulsion, embargoes, sanctions, military intervention and execution. In the event it is one of the Permanent Security Council members, they can ask to vote to nullify their Permanent Security Council seat, or accept the Security Council's administered penalties. Nations who follow international law today can be grouped into success rates depending on their history. 20 * multiple. How to determine the success rate of your nation in international law, the nature of international law as it really is. In the world post-1946, and since that time, many nations today still struggle with international law. To answer that question, we must first look to their history, culture and political practices. In doing so, we can compare the Charter, all binding laws and conventions from 1946 till today. By looking at the General Assembly UN states' individual structures and state practices, we can extrapolate success rates. An Axis power from World War II. X equals -0.15. An imperial system and history. I equals -0.1. A colonial power. C equals -0.25. A colony or colonial system. S equals -0.45. A monarchy. M equals -0.1. A dictatorship. D equals -0.3. An autocracy. A equals -0.2. A non-UN state. N equals -0.5. A specified religion of state. R equals -0.3. Abolishment of religion in state. AR equals -0.3. Race or sex discriminations of state. RSD equals -0.3. A permanent member of UNSC. UNSC equals +0.5. To work out the calculation, I will use my UN state of Canada. Success rate of your nation in international law, SR. SR equals -0.45, colonial system, +-0.1, monarchy, +-0.2, autocracy, equals -0.75 SR. The success rate of my nation Canada with international law is -0.75, or 75%. Canada is likely to make the wrong decision in international law 75% of the time. 21 * multiple. The UNSC permanent 5 members, what should they take from the nature of international law as it really is? While the Permanent Security Council members are very high on the success rate index, they are not immune to the 1946 Charter of the Union. There is no veto available for, and in the case of sex, race, religion, standard of living, invasion and human rights, a UNSC permanent member can be subject to expulsion and or extreme military force by February 3 of the General Assembly. This would also mean declaration of war by the other 4 permanent members. Anything short of an unanimous decision, and likely World War III, would occur and dissolve the UN. The Allies of World War II crafted a momentous document that changed the lives of every citizen on Earth for the better. The responsibilities and power bestowed on those 5 countries weighs heavy and should not be taken lightly. Individually, they should read this paper and take the very real presentation of the nature of international law as it really is as an excellent way to strengthen and grow their international relations. The takeaway on international law as it really is. Over the course of this paper, we went through origins and history of city-states, national states, empires, imperialism, colonialism, the League of Nations, and finally the UNSC. With a well-balanced look at all historical narratives, this paper proceeded to look inward at the nations of today and assess where they will be in navigating international law. Military might is clearly today, as it was over all recorded history, the number 1 factor in determining global governance. The major twist is for the first time in history sovereignty, self-determination, race, sex, religion, labor, standard of living, and all continents in the world were given a universal document. By measuring individual UN states according to key factors and the binding laws of the UNSC, one can determine how the UNSC will react to your nation. By looking at the UNSC permanent members, we can also see their shortcomings and possibly change our nation's directions to, or predict individual UNSC decisions in absolute international law. Closing message from the author: the nature of international law as it really is. It is my sincerest hope that law students, professors, lawyers, historians, political scientists, economists, policy makers, politicians, the UN General Assembly and UNSC read this plain speak paper, The Nature of International Law as It Really Is, and apply the works done here to how they navigate all aspects of law. Domestic policy, legislation, or economic aspirations can lead to international consequences and possibly an unintended rippling effect. Footnotes: https://www.un.org/security council